All right, good afternoon to you all, and happy whatever day it is. I think it's Tuesday. Just remember to mute your mics and hopefully either raise your tiny little hands or send me a chat, and I will turn to you to try to answer your questions. At the start of today's Yemen Pledging Conference, the Secretary General said more than 5 years of conflict have left Yemenis hanging on by a thread, their economy in tatters, their institutions facing near collapse. He also said that 4 people out of every 5, that's 24 million people in all, need life-saving aid in what remains the world's largest humanitarian crisis. We are in a race against time, the Secretary General warned, as reports indicate that in Aden, mortality rates from COVID-19 are among the highest in the world. He added that we must preserve the major humanitarian aid operation that is already underway and the world's largest, while developing new public health programs to fight the virus and strengthen healthcare systems. The Secretary General said that aid agencies estimate they would need up to $2.41 billion to cover essential aid from June until December, and that includes programs to counter COVID-19. Unless we secure significant funding, he added, more than 30 out of 41 major UN programs in Yemen will close in the next few weeks. Mark Lowcock, our humanitarian chief, told the pledging conference that COVID-19's rapid response team are funded only until the end of June. Next month, he said, we could start winding down treatment for severely malnourished children. Support for cholera facilities will also start to reduce. Mr. Lowcock added that pledges will not save lives until they are paid, and so far, most of the pledges remain unpaid. Today, the Financing for Development Forum's second meeting brought together representatives from banks, funds, and financial institutions to mobilize $1.2 trillion in humanitarian and economic relief to developing countries reeling under the impact of the pandemic. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, said it is important to find multilateral solutions to address the underlying fragilities that were exposed by the pandemic. She stressed that the UN's focus is on developing countries, but also participating in the meeting were the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, which are mobilizing together $1 trillion, $175 billion, and $13 billion, respectively, in COVID relief. The multi-billion-dollar Green Climate Fund, which has already suspended debt repayment for the next 6 months, is also being represented. We have a new policy brief coming out. The Secretary General is continuing to look at the many ways COVID-19 is impacting people all around the world. Tomorrow, just after midnight, a brief will be released that focuses on those who are already in vulnerable situations before the crisis, people on the move. We will share the report under embargo with you shortly, as well as a video message recorded by the Secretary General. And some positive news coming out of Libya. The UN support mission in that country welcomes the acceptance by the Government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army of the resumption of talks on the ceasefire and associated security arrangements. That resumption is based on the draft agreement submitted by the UN mission to the parties during the Joint Military Commission talks on February 23rd. The UN mission hopes the resumption of the Joint Military Commission talks will be marked by a return to calm and a humanitarian truce to pave the way for a lasting ceasefire agreement. The mission wants the resumption of talks to enable the competent authorities to focus on addressing the repercussions and threat of the pandemic and facilitate the response of local and international agencies to urgent humanitarian needs. The mission looks forward to starting the new round of negotiations by video conference in light of the current circumstances. It hopes that the same professional, serious, responsible spirit that are characterized the first and second rounds in Geneva will prevail in these talks. Turning to Syria, the massive UN cross-border humanitarian response continues to provide life-saving assistance to people in need throughout the northwest of the country, and that includes health items to prepare for the pandemic. The massive scale-up has seen an average of over 1,350 trucks per month crossing from the 2 Security Council authorized border crossing points from Turkey in the first 5 months of 2020. They carry food, health items, and other critical humanitarian support. In May alone, 1,781 trucks crossed into Syria. That's the highest number of trucks to go across the border since the operations were first authorized by the Security Council in 2014. Despite the massive operation, needs remain incredibly high throughout the northwest Syria, with 2.8 million people in need, including over 1 million people living in camps or informal shelters. Meanwhile, we remain concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on people across the country whose healthcare system has been decimated by almost a decade of war. Yesterday, the Syrian Ministry of Health announced the total number of cases has reached 123, and that includes 6 fatalities. Turning to Niger, more than 1,000 people are on the run following a brutal attack on a displacement site in the western part of Niger. This took place on Sunday afternoon. The UN Refugee Agency strongly condemns the targeted killings of 2 Malian refugee leaders and a local host community leader. The attacks took place in Intikane in western Niger, about 70 kilometers from the border with Mali. Over 50 armed men on motorbikes swarmed the site, hosting 20,000 refugees and 15,000 displaced people from Niger. In addition to the killings, the assailants torched stocks of relief items. They also destroyed mobile phone towers, as well as the main water station and pipes. The UN Refugee Agency is working to support the survivors and is providing urgently needed assistance. As we have mentioned regularly, the past few months have seen a sharp increase in attacks in the Liptako-Gourma region, where Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger share borders. UNHCR renews its call on warring parties in Sahel to protect civilians, who are, of course, bearing the brunt of these attacks. And staying in the region, about 50 people died in 3 separate attacks this weekend in Burkina Faso's northern region, more precisely in the Sahel North, Center North, and East. This, according to our humanitarian colleagues, is the deadliest violence since March, when 43 civilians were killed following 2 attacks in villages in the north. Rising insecurity in the country is making humanitarian access more difficult. Currently, 2.2 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. That's up from 1.5 million last year in December. More than 860,000 people are internally displaced. And in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, aid organizations are delivering life-saving assistance and reprioritizing their activities to ensure their programs are safe for population as well as humanitarian workers. The humanitarian community needs $371 million for the humanitarian and COVID-19 response. So far, only 21% of the funds have been received. And in Somalia, where there are more than 2,000 confirmed cases, nearly 80 deaths from COVID-19. Even before the first case was confirmed on March 16th, the UN team in Somalia has been supporting the government to prevent and contain the spread of the virus. The UN has helped the Ministry of Health purchase tests. The World Health Organization has trained health workers and provided medical supplies for the main hospitals in Mogadishu treating COVID-19 patients. The World Food Programme has airlifted humanitarian cargo to remote locations across Somalia and supporting the government's efforts to prevent the spread of the disease. For its part, UNICEF has reached nearly 560,000 people across Somalia with hygiene kits and emergency water supplies, among other items. The UN has reached some 60 million people across the country with prevention campaigns over the radio. And the UN Support Office in Somalia and the UN Assistance Mission there are working together closely with the UN team on providing logistical support, such as transporting materials and people. And in Ghana, where there are more than 8,000 confirmed cases of the virus and 36 deaths, as we told you yesterday, there's a new resident coordinator for the country, Charles Abani. The UN team continues to support the government's response and recovery, and the UN Development Program helped to ensure that nearly 800 facilities across the country are complying with health and safety protocols. The UN Population Fund has partnered with authorities for a campaign to end fistula, and the UN team there is also engaging with youth, who represent nearly 60% of the population. More than 200 young people from across the country have taken part in online sessions backed by UNESCO to teach new skills and promote youth engagement and leadership. To support young artists, an initiative by the International Organization for Migration and the EU is using street art to share prevention messages, as well as messages of hope and solidarity, with a special focus on the protection of migrants. In Somalia, there are more than 2,000 confirmed cases and nearly 80 deaths from COVID-19. Even before the first case was confirmed on March 16th, the UN team in Somalia has been supporting the government and to contain the spread of the virus. The UN has helped, bear with me 2 seconds here, looking at my notes. I do want to mention all the work that our peacekeeping missions have been doing. Give me 2 seconds. Let me just turn to Latin America for a second. In Bolivia, the Secretary General welcomes the announcement today by the President of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal for a new date for holding the country's general elections. That's on the 6th of September. The Secretary General calls upon all political parties to cooperate fully with the Electoral Tribunal. Sorry, I'm having a big computer problem. With the Electoral Tribunal to bring about a peaceful, transparent, and inclusive election. At the request of the tribunal and with the support of the European Union, of Sweden, Canada, and the UK, our UN colleagues will continue to provide technical assistance to the electoral authorities, including on mitigation measures to ensure that elections are held in the best public health conditions. And turning to El Salvador, UNICEF there is working with the government and its partners to ensure that children are kept safe after the country was hit by Tropical Storm Amanda. UNICEF is providing support in the areas of water, sanitation, and hygiene, as well as personal protection to prevent the spread of COVID-19, among other diseases. And wanted to flag that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change today kicked off a series of virtual events to take climate action forward. The UN Momentum for Climate Change event will run until June 10th and will focus on making the pandemic recovery as sustainable as possible to respond to the climate crisis. The series of online events offers opportunities for governments and partners to continue to share information to showcase how climate action is progressing under special circumstances the world is currently facing. And on World Environment Day, which is this Friday, the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change will launch the Race Till Zero to mobilize leadership and support from business, cities, and regions and investors for a zero carbon recovery. And turning to air travel, the International Civil Aviation Organization yesterday adopted a new report and recommendations. It's aimed at restarting the international air transport system and aligning its global recovery. The COVID-19 report and guidelines contain a detailed situational analysis and is supported by a series of recommendations focused around objectives for public health, aviation safety and security, as well as aviation economic recovery. The content is supplemented by the report's special, quote, takeoff document, which contains guidelines for public health risk mitigation measures in 4 separate modules relating to airports, aircraft, crew, and air cargo. For those of you interested in planes, the report is available on ICAO's website. And to end on a positive note, I am delighted to thank our friends in Cote d'Ivoire, Guyana, and Myanmar. All 3 member states have paid their regular budget dues in full, which takes us up to 95. So I will leave it at that. We had apologies. I had some technical problems with my prompter on my end, but I should be able to hear and see you hopefully. So let's go. Okay, Philippe asked reactions to the elections in Bolivia. I think I read that. I read out a note Bolivia. uh, Pam, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Steph. Thank you. My question is about racism around the world. Several international diplomats, experts, the UN High Commissioner have commented on it. Does the SG have any comment on racism and the events in the United States? Thank you.
I think yesterday I answered that pretty extensively. I would also encourage you to look at the tweet the Secretary General put out on Saturday on the very topic of racism. I think in the U.S., as in any other part in the world, for us, diversity is a richness, not a threat. We've said that over and over again. But the success of diverse societies needs to include investments in social cohesion, which also includes the need to address possible areas of discrimination and of racism. But it must be the answer to that. It must be a national government must be mobilized. Local authorities must be mobilized. Civil society, faith-based organization, the private sector, basically society as a whole.
Thank you, Steph. Just one follow-up. Do you expect this SG to make any comment of this on camera? It would be helpful to some of us.
I understand. If something happens, I will definitely let you. I will let you know. All right, Edie.
Thank you very much, Steph. I have a couple of questions. First, on the resumed talks in Libya, do you have any details on where, when, how long this might take? And who will the UN be taking part? Will Stephanie Williams be there?
Both the acting SRSG Stephanie Williams and the mission are remaining in direct contact with the parties to figure out the next steps and the logistics about the resumption of the talks. So we're taking it one step at a time. I think the announcement was very welcomed, and now we'll be in touch. Ms. Williams and others will be in touch with the parties on how to actually get the resumption of the talks going. Obviously, I would add that the Secretary General adds his voice in welcoming what we heard from Libya. And I think what will be important is that the Libyan parties empower the representatives at the Joint Military Commission negotiations, and that they engage constructively and, of course, in good faith in these discussions. But we do expect we'll be in touch with the parties for the talks, but we expect things to get moving in the next few days.
Okay, my next question is that there's been a call for a G20 meeting by 225 former and present global leaders, including the Secretary General's predecessor, to agree on a $2.5 trillion plan to help developing and medium-income countries tackle both COVID-19 and the economic recovery from it. Does the Secretary General support this appeal for a G20 meeting to agree on that package?
Well, clearly, whether or not to meet is up to the members of the G20 and the chairmanship. What I would say is that the G20 plays a critical role in defining the post-COVID recovery and the resources that will be needed. I think we were very happy to see a large number of G20 and G7 countries participate in the UN meeting on Thursday that the Secretary General chaired, along with the Prime Ministers of Jamaica and Canada. But the G20 has a big role to play, and we would obviously welcome that role.
And my final question is that there's been the first reported death of a Rohingya refugee in camp in Cox's Bazar, and wondered if the Secretary General had any comments on.
I mean, you know, it's obviously it's a very worrying development. I do know that our humanitarian teams on the ground are working very diligently with the refugee community, with the host community, and of course the Bangladeshi communities to try to contain the outbreak as quickly and as effectively as possible. But obviously, refugee camps, especially the various camps around Cox's Bazar, are a very, very high risk area, and that's why we're working very quickly to try to contain it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Benny, and then we'll go to Nabil.
Steph, just a quick question about UN security in coordination with NYPD. Is there any action to prepare for possible, breach of the compound, looting, or anything like that is happening all around New York?
Our security chief, in fact, I spoke to him this morning, is in close touch with the U.S. mission and with the NYPD to ensure the safety of the UN compound, but we're not aware of any specific targeting of the UN, but we're remaining in close and constant touch with the federal and the local authorities on the security front. Okay, Nabil. Nabil?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. I heard
Nabil,
that
I'd like to see
the
you
SG
as well.
sent a letter. Excuse me, say it again?
I'd like to see you as well, but I can hear you. But go ahead.
Okay, that's
Go ahead.
the video is on now. If you can see me,
Yep.
I'm
Perfect.
outside. So I have a question on the SG's letter to the Emir of Qatar. I heard he sent a letter, I think, about a humanitarian bridge between Doha and Kabul in Afghanistan. Also, what's happening in Yemen? Have you repositioned UN personnel in Yemen? Did Qatar have anything to do with this?
Yeah, a couple of things. So yes, indeed, the Secretary General wrote to the Emir of Qatar, I think really to express his thanks and appreciation that Qatar's had for the UN during this pandemic, notably with the air bridge, as you mentioned, between Doha and Kabul. Also with the Emir's facilitation and repositioning some of the UN personnel from Yemen. The flights by the UN's kind of, air transport, the UN Humanitarian Air Service, enabled critical deployments of emergency aid and assistance to Afghanistan, as well as the rotation of UN personnel. And as I mentioned, Qatar also provided essential and timely support for the transit of personnel from the UN mission in Hodeidah, which is as a temporary adjustment to our operations in Yemen. So basically a message of appreciation. I can't hear you. Hear
me now. The destination, where did you move your personnel? To what destination?
They were moved to different locations. I can't go into those operational details.
Thank you.
Okay, James Reinl, and then Evelyn.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Two questions. First one is, obviously there's been a Yemen Pledging Conference earlier today. Do you have an idea of when we're going to get an update about what numbers, how big the donations were, how much we've gotten? And just as a side note, obviously aid funding comes up quite a lot here. Sometimes it could be quite hard to work out exactly what numbers, what the numbers mean. And so whoever's putting the numbers together, if they could have a simple headline number that we can follow.
That message will be passed on. I think it is always, it's complicated. The number is always complicated because the numbers are complicated. I would also encourage you to look at the various web pages where the trust funds are updated on a daily basis. We hope by the end of the day we'll have some sort of preliminary figures. We'll get our OCHA colleagues to share those.
Thanks so much for that. I had my own question as well, which was the African Development Bank over in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. There's a controversy at the moment related to an investigation into the president of the bank, Akinwumi Adesina, for bad organization and some financial irregularities. It's kind of like spiraling, and other countries are getting involved. For example, the US has said it doesn't want it doesn't think that the investigation that cleared the president should stand. The UN, are you involved? Is the AFDB a formal partner of yours in any way? And do you make any comment on this investigation?
I'm not aware of any formal administrative links between the United Nations Secretariat and the African Development Bank. I assume they have their own procedures to follow on these sorts of things. Of course, we do work with the African Development Bank. They participate in our meetings and on projects, but their internal administration is really up to them, and I assume the process will be followed through. And obviously, countries that are members of its board or supply with funds have something to say on that. Evelyn?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. James just asked the same question on getting some kind of results or list from the Saudi conference. Do you have, what web pages should one look at, if any?
We'll send to the resident correspondent list the web pages.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Iftikhar. Iftikhar.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Thank you, Steph. As you know, over the last few days, Pakistan's foreign minister has been communicating with the Secretary General through letters and a phone call about India's violation of the line of control in the disputed Kashmir region, as well as other Indian actions that have escalated tensions between the two countries. Does the Secretary General have any response to Pakistan's complaints?
I do know there was a conversation that took place. I think letters were also sent to be circulated to the membership, which they have. The Secretary General's basic message is always been for all and every party to avoid anything that would escalate tensions. Abdel Hamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. In fact, Edith took my question about Libya and others took my question about Yemen, but I have just...
I'm sure you have one in your back pocket.
Yeah. There is a meeting on Thursday by the UN Committee on Palestinian Rights about the annexation. Will the SG be speaking at this conference?
Let me find out. And I will let you know.
Thank you.
Okay. Dulcie, you have a question.
Okay, so what is your reaction to the campaign by Code Blue regarding Jane Hall-Lute's status? Does she still work for the UN?
She continues to serve on a when actually employed or dollar a year. I'd have to check on the issue of Cyprus and other issues, but I was not aware of the campaign.
They sent out a press release yesterday.
Okay, I did not see it.
Okay. It basically asked, where's Jane Hall-Lute? Yeah.
All right, Gloria, you had a question.
It is not a UN problem, this problem, interracial we have. It's President Obama should come in giving his advice. He was our president. He was a black. We have a grand jury in America with blacks sitting there. We have brains that can be sitting in arbitrating on these. These are both groups.
Gloria, I hear what you're saying, but as you said, it's really not an issue for the UN to weigh in on. I think I was very clear in the Secretary General's position yesterday as to his stance on the developments we have seen in the US. All right. It's really not, Gloria. With all due respect, it's really not for us to weigh in on that particular issue.
Okay, I apologize.
No need to apologize for a question. I'm just I apologize for my answer. Lack thereof. Okay, any more questions? Speak up now or hold your questions until tomorrow. Okay. Take care, and we'll see you all mañana. Bye.